All right, we got to start with where we started tonight,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
talking about the Alamo
Take
Draft
a step
House.
back here.
Yeah, I mean, we all need a breather after that. Um, and this is something that the Alamo Draft House posted yesterday on their Twitter channel from their Austin headquarters after Governor Greg Abbott of Texas removed the mandatory mask mandate. And they, along with a number of other businesses in Austin, said, yes, even though the mask mandate is gone, we're going to keep it in place because we follow the guidance of CDC and medical experts. And I just want to say, like, this is just one of a million reasons I appreciate the Alamo Draft House is the willingness to do this kind of stuff. They also announced this today that they're filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and we largely think this is just to reorganize debt and to emerge from it. But any money from the bits tonight, all the subs, all the donations, we're gonna put that right into the Alamo employee fund because we need movie theaters like this, and they gave us a place to do like a zany show where we talk about the science in films like The Rock. So I hope they return. And they you can clearly see by what they're doing, they're trying to do this the right way and be responsible in how they emerge from this. So
Yeah,
best.
Nightbot is posting the Alamo Family Fund link for those who want to donate directly to them. Kishore and I were talking earlier that we're both gonna add donate to them as well. We did that early on in the pandemic when we started doing these virtual events, and want to re-up our support because as we talked about a number of times, we love them, they love us, and we want to make sure that their employees have stuff are sort of taken care of, can get into it, and that the Alamo itself can continue and have great people working there. We've been treated really well by not only the management, but like the wait staff are awesome. And they say that like they've told us that they love, having a shift when we're up there because they think it's hilarious and they get to watch the movie for the most part and see our shows afterwards.
Yeah, I will say I think they don't necessarily love us; they tolerate us, but that's a form of love. That's a form of love.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Um, we just wanted to put up some pictures and memories. I just threw together some pictures. So I went to Alcatraz not that long before the pandemic started. I think it was in late 2019 that I last went, and it is a beautiful place. If you've never been, it's amazing. The audio tour is the best audio tour I've ever had in a national park. There's all these weird artifacts. You can wander the entire grounds for the most part, except some structures that are in some real disrepair. You can see some weird artifacts. I put this in here for Jeff seeing the Coca Cola because he always likes highlighting brands, brand placement. The top two shots in the upper left and the upper right were shots from an event that we did with Nerd Night on the island. And in the upper left was a bunch of marine researchers talking about sharks that live in the area around Alcatraz. The middle is the Broadway area. And we had a sea shanty band that was on board. This was even before TikTok said it was cool.
Nice,
Well
nice.
before, this is 2015. That were singing on boards on the way, and I found them like in the middle of it was in the middle of the night. It was like 9 o'clock or something, and they had just holed up in a jail cell and were just singing, and it was echoing throughout the cell blocks. It was just magical. We had a neuroscientist talking about what long-term imprisonment does to people's brains. We had researchers taking people talking about some of the bugs on the island. It was a really amazing once in a lifetime experience, and it just reinforced to me how much science actually exists on this island. And we're going to get into a few aspects of that tonight.
First, let's get into VX. This is a main plot point of the movie. We talked about it a bit throughout the show. But let's get into some of the science, some of the real facts about this. It is real. VX is short for Venomous Agent X, and it's one of the best known so-called V nerve agents. It was based originally on research from Gerhard Schrader at IG Farben, a German pharmaceutical company, in the 1930s. So German pharmaceutical companies in the 1930s doing some not great stuff, as you might imagine. But VX and the modern V nerve agents that we know of today were first discovered in 1952 by chemists Ranjanit Ghosh and J.F. Newman at Imperial Chemical Industries in England, while they were actually working on insecticide research. And that's actually what Nick Cage mentions in the movie. In 1954, it was actually put on the market in the UK as an insecticide under the brand name Amaton, but it was soon pulled from the shelves after its extreme toxicity to humans was truly appreciated. And just 1 year later, Imperial Chemical Industries stopped all production of it. I'm still shocked that it actually made it onto the shelves for a while. The chemical company in England stops production after about a year. 3 years later, however, in 1958, the British government starts doing research on producing VX at their research lab at Porton Down. And soon they shared this with their American allies. And of course, the US Army began producing VX and actually testing it on humans. The first person they tested it on was Dr. Van M. Sim. He actually underwent an intravenous drip of infusion of VX. After about 3.5 hours, he suddenly became pale and delirious, and the experiment was immediately terminated. In their conclusion from this and other tests, researchers estimated that 2.12 micrograms per kilogram of VX delivered intravenously over the course of several hours would be the maximum tolerable dosage for a human. So there is a known amount of the maximum amount of this stuff you could get and be okay, or at least not die, and it's not a lot. Fun side note, Dr. Sim, this creepy dude in the bottom right, also experimented on himself and about 7,000 US Army soldiers with not only VX, but also sarin, mustard gas, and combinations of alcohol, caffeine, and LSD. So he was a real piece of work.
the Super Size Me guy before Super Size Me, I guess.
I guess so. Experimenting on himself for the good of science?
Yeah,
All
science
right.
question mark.
Okay, so a little bit more of the history of VX and who had it and when it was actually used. We know the British military had VX in 1958. In 1961, just after 2 years after Dr. Sim's experiment started, the US military started producing VX in large quantities as a chemical weapon. The Cubans got their hands on it at some point, and they actually used it quite a bit in 1984 during the Angolan Civil War. Pretty much the only time that VX was used in a major conflict in a war setting. In December 1994 and January 1995, the Japanese doomsday cult called Aleph attacked 3 people in Osaka with 150 grams of VX that they had produced, killing one. And fairly famously, on February 13th, 2017, Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, died after being attacked with VX in the Kuala Lumpur airport in Malaysia. The 2 women that attacked Kim Jong-nam were paid and told that they were going to be on a hidden camera prank show, where they were each going to rub an unsuspecting man's face with a cloth while walking through the airport. You know, prank show. Unbeknownst to these women, the cloths had the 2 components that, when mixed on human skin, become the VX nerve agent. So the individual components are actually harmless. So both of the women were perfectly safe. But when they mixed him on Kim Jong-nam's face, it became VX and he died quickly. This incident is actually discussed in detail in an episode of the Netflix show Spycraft that came out pretty recently. Super bizarro story. There's a lot of background about how these women were groomed and were on this show, multiple episodes. Very weird stuff. Okay, but I want to end this little segment on a slightly less depressing, sad note. So by the 1970s, the US had actually started destroying its stockpile of VX and other chemical weapons. Other countries were following suit soon after that. Fast forward to 1993, and the UN ratifies the Chemical Weapons Convention that prohibits large-scale production and use of chemical weapons and classifies it as a type of weapon of mass destruction. And so officially, according to that, production and stockpiling of VX that exceeds 100 grams per year is outlawed, except for, quote, research, medical, or pharmaceutical purposes in aggregate quantities not exceeding 10 kilograms or 22 pounds per year, end quote. The convention actually went into effect a few years later in 1997. That's when the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or OPCW, was founded. And that actually started enforcing this convention and enforcing the disposal of chemical weapons like VX. And so we have the image on the bottom right here is actually the headquarters of the OPCW in The Hague, Netherlands. In 1997, when the OPCW came into existence, there was over 21,000 tons of VX worldwide. But by the end of 2015, 98% of that stockpile had been destroyed. And in 2017, at the 20th anniversary of the OPCW, they declared that over the previous 20 years, 95% of all chemical weapons worldwide had been destroyed. So lots of good progress, but obviously still bad actors, state-sponsored or otherwise, that are trying to make up small amounts of some of these chemical weapons.
So let's talk about the chemistry of VX itself. It's an organophosphate compound. It's relatively simple. And organophosphates are a broad class of compounds, and many of them are still used as insecticides today. So that's why it was initially developed as an insecticide. So the reason that VX is so deadly is that it interferes with the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which, in an oversimplified version, acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that goes between our motor neurons and it helps contract muscles. VX actually attacks acetylcholine esterase, the enzyme that actually breaks down acetylcholine. And that process by which acetylcholine esterase breaks down acetylcholine is actually what allows muscles to relax. Specifically, it breaks down this inhibitor by binding to the serine. That's where it says SER in the on the right here. That's an alpha amino acid that is part of acetylcholine esterase, and it transforms it into sort of this phosphate complex, and then it attacks a histidine, which is another alpha amino acid, on the other side of the acetylcholine esterase. This results in sort of the occupation of this site and the inhibition of this enzyme to actually cleave acetylcholine. And so what it ends up happening because of this, VX essentially causes acetylcholine to build up in your system, and so your muscles contract and they never release, and so quickly you get into a situation where you have muscle paralysis. And so the result of most VX related deaths are not dealing with any sort of brain or other damage. What ends up happening is your diaphragm essentially just contracts and never uncontracts, so that people die of asphyxiation very quickly.
Not face melting.
Not face melting or bubbling, but it is a very quick acting agent, because these muscles are contracting and relaxing on a pretty regular basis. Now, let's talk about the process to actually neutralize VX, because as Jeff alluded to, most of the VX stockpile across the world has been destroyed at this point. And let's look at the approach that the U.S. Army took in the town of Newport, Indiana. This is actually from a National Academies report that detailed the destruction of this weapon stockpile. You can read the 100, 200-page report. And here's a diagram of the reactor they actually used. And what they essentially did was the VX was stockpiled in these like almost ton-sized containers. And what they did is they drained it into this chemical system that pumped it into a reactor that was filled with hot water. It was almost boiling water. It's about 200 degrees F and 18% sodium hydroxide. And they essentially just reduce the organophosphate until it's just a bunch of inert compounds. And then they basically load it into some disposal containers, and then they heat blast the initial containers that the VX was transported in to destroy any remnants of the compound. And so this is basically a pretty similar process to what we would consider waste incineration. It's just basically dumping a lot of high heat with the added addition of using high concentration sodium hydroxide to just reduce the crap out of the chemical compound. All the VX that was stored at this Newport site, which there's tons of compound, was successfully destroyed in 2010. And this was the Army's announcement that the stockpile was successfully deployed. And this is an actual picture from that day. Now, I'm not sure that I would celebrate chemical weapons destruction with tiny American flags, but you be you.
Beautiful.
Uh, DuckDuckGoose. So the vaporization. If I go back to that reactor diagram, they took some of the off gassing elements and recycle them back into the system. So it was a completely closed system that took any elements that came off because of vaporization and brought it back in. So it would just constantly reduce. It was essentially like a closed kettle system, like you would have for like distilling gin. But it wasn't always this way. So before this chemical process of neutralization took effect, we tried to destroy some VX stockpiles in the 1960s. And in the 1960s, the U.S. had a program called CHASE. And CHASE stood for, and this is the worst acronym we've come across in the
Love
history
it. I
of
love it.
big screen science. CHASE stands for cut holes and sink them. The idea was to load up ships that were retired and decommissioned with tons of leftover munitions and chemical weapons, send them out into the Atlantic, and sink them. That was the entire idea about this, because if they were still within their munition containers and at the bottom of the ocean, they wouldn't be able to ever be activated and used. Here is a map of all the locations that we have done this through the chase operation off the Atlantic and in the Gulf. For VX specifically, VX was part of Chase 8, and on June 15th, 1967, the SS Corporal Eric G. Gibson, which was a kind of steamship that had been retired, was packed with 4,500 one-ton containers of mustard agent and 7,300 rockets filled with VX. The Army loaded the ship at a naval pier in Earl, New Jersey, and sunk it 7,200 feet off the coast of Atlantic City. Years later, in about 1970, they actually went down and checked on it, and there was no contamination or environmental damage. But literally, this was the way that we disposed of a number of chemical weapons in the 60s and 70s, was literally go out and sink them. And yes, the to the questions in the chat, yes, they are still there.
Yeah,
Horrifying, I know. And that's why
when
I
we
call
were
this process neutralization with air quotes.
yeah, when we were doing research for this and we were like, this is real. This is like 74 almost 7,400 VX rockets are just sitting off the coast of New Jersey.
And so, like, initially, the idea of being like, oh, they sent one into the bay, is that bad? I'm like, nope, that's actually based on how it actually is going on in real life. I mean, we're
Truth
laughing about it, but we're not laughing about this. This
no.
was terrifying to find out.
Truth stranger than fiction and terrifying. All right. Let's talk about something that's a little bit more less scary. Let's talk about the rocks, or rather the geology of Alcatraz Island and the SF Bay area. All right. As many people know, the San Francisco Bay is between two major fault lines, the San Andreas Fault and the Hayward Fault. Uh, the San Andreas is the main one. It is formed by the boundary between the North American tectonic plate and the Pacific plate. It's known as a transform fault because the plates are actually sliding past each other, moving about 1 inch per year. And so if you do the math, that means in about 20 million years, Los Angeles and SF will be right next to each other. My parents will be happy because it'll be much easier for them to come visit me. So that'll be nice. The fault itself, the rocks around the fault itself are about 30 million years old. But most of the rocks around the Northern California coast and the Bay Area are much older, more like 80 to 200 million years old. And so those rocks are thought to mostly have formed from when the Pacific Ocean floor was subducted beneath the western edge of the North American plate. So we have sort of a cartoon here of that going on. And so when that happened, this formed what's known as the Franciscan Terrane Complex, named after San Francisco. And that's the complex of rock formations that covers most of the Bay Area and is made up of oceanic rocks. That includes igneous material and marine sedimentary material. So in the Bay Area is the Franciscan Complex, and it's divided into 8 subterranes, smaller chunks of sort of similar type of rock. So each terrain has a type of rock based on the type of rock, based on the ages. And one of the terrains is indeed the Alcatraz terrain. It is one of the oldest terrains in the Bay Area. It's that sort of dark green color on the map here. And so that covers Treasure Island as well as Alcatraz Island and sort of the northeast corner of the city of San Francisco. And so the Alcatraz terrain is mostly sandstone deposited by underwater landslides. And it contains fossils of mollusks that lived around 140 million years ago. That's how we've sort of dated that. So this is going back to sort of the early Cretaceous period. So there is the rocks of the rock.
Let's talk about the wildlife on and around Alcatraz. And by that, of course, I mean sharks. Uh, Great whites are actually very, very rare in the bay. The great whites are actually mostly out by the Farallon Islands, which is about 35 miles west of the Golden Gate Bridge. The great whites generally don't come inside the bay because there's a relative amount of fresh water that mix with the salt water in the bay coming in from the delta, and generally it's thought that great whites avoid that sort of inlet of freshwater, and not only because they're adapted to saltwater, but actually that freshwater tends to interfere with some of their kidney operation. These are actually the sharks of the bay. This is a leopard shark on the left and a brown smoothhound shark on the right. Both of these are essentially bottom feeder sharks. They're completely harmless to humans, but they're the ones that actually tend to live in and around the Alcatraz area. That being said, in October 2015, a great white actually killed a California sea lion 20 feet off the pier of Alcatraz in front of hundreds of tourists. So this is on camera from the boat. It's on camera from tourists that are on the island. It was on camera from cameras that were just at the dock site. No humans were harmed. I mean, it's just a shark killing a sea lion, but there's literally a pool of blood that kind of comes to the surface from the actual attack. And the result of this, because there's many articles written about this, is many people actually stopped swimming from Alcatraz at this point in time because they're worried about shark attacks, but there was never any shark attack. But because I love sea lions and I want to be fair to them, here is a sea lion that is eating a leopard shark. And this photo comes from October 2019. The leopard shark is the thing that's sort of coming out of the water, this sort of white bit here. Oh, wait, I think I can do laser pointer.
Oh,
It's this
nice.
white bit here. And this is the sea lion. And of course, there's always seagulls and ducks around when cool things are happening. But this was captured in October 2019. The circle of life, as we like to say. But the weirdest animal on Alcatraz has to be these guys. These are glowing millipedes. So in early 2012, the National Park Service, their employees placed some non-toxic dye into the food for rats because they had a rat problem on the island. The dye made was intended to make the rats easier to track because they would excrete the fluorescent dye in their poop. And they brought sort of a team from UC Davis's entomology club to canvass the island and look for the fluorescent rat poop. But by the way, this story is amazing and I love it. It gets even weirder. And so while they were looking for fluorescent rat poop, they had a set of UV blacklights. By the way, the reason they were looking for these rats was I mean, it wasn't just because rats are bad. It's because the Alcatraz is actually a migratory spot for a lot of birds, and the rats were actually interfering with a lot of the bird population there, their ability to sort of nest and reproduce. So they're trying to hunt down the rats to protect the bird population. But anyways, while this Davis team was out looking for fluorescent rat poop, they found something else glowing. It was the set of millipedes, and they were alive, and they have never seen millipedes fluorescing under black light in the entire Bay Area. So why would it be special on Alcatraz? These were fluorescent millipedes, and the scientists who found them is a professor at UC Davis, Robert Kimsey, and his student Alexander Wen. Actually, Robert actually came to Nerd Night on Alcatraz that night and was leading people around to look for the fluorescent millipedes on the island. Um, the millipedes actually contain a small amount of cyanide, and the scientists at Davis actually said they actually smell sweet when you pick them up, like cyanide tends to do. It's really low concentration, but their working theory right now, and they don't actually have a full understanding of this, is that this is a bioluminescent animal that is actually demonstrating that it's poisonous to a number of other predators in the area, warning them of its cyanide content in there. And that's why it's developed this. There are other creatures in the Bay Area that have bioluminescent properties that show off this similar cyanide poisoning. So that's their working theory, but they have no idea why they've only really found them on Alcatraz at this point.
Yeah, I like them. All right, let's talk about the rock and swimming. No, not that one. But that picture is the first thing that pops up when you Google swimming the rock, or at least it is for me based off of my search history. But that's beside the point. Okay, so one of the challenges when escaping from the rock was the cold temperatures of the SF Bay water, which never gets above about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And so when you're in water that cold without protection, or even water that's even up to the mid 70s Fahrenheit, you become at risk for what's called immersion hypothermia, a specific type of hypothermia that, of course, can lead to confusion and then decreased heart rate, decreased respiratory rate, decreased blood pressure, and eventually death either by drowning, organ failure. Lots of bad stuff happens. And then even after you get out of the cold water, there's something that's called after drop, which is where your core temperature continues to drop even though you're no longer in the cold water or in the cold exposure. And so in 2000, scientists from the University of California at San Francisco published this paper in the American Journal of Emergency Medicine. In it, they studied 11 people who swam without wetsuits or other protective clothing from Alcatraz to downtown San Francisco on New Year's Day when the bay's water was about 53 degrees Fahrenheit. So to determine if these people had hypothermia or after drop, they took rectal temperature readings for 45 minutes after they got out of the water. I don't know if it was 45 minutes all at once or every few minutes for 45 minutes, but that is a lot of butt play. But anyway, applying the official American Heart Association definition of hypothermia, which is if your core temperature is less than 96.8 degrees, hypothermia was seen in 5 of the 11 subjects, so nearly half. Using a more rigorous and traditional definition of hypothermia, which is 95.0 degrees Fahrenheit, hypothermia was only seen in 1 subject. But this after drop, where their core temperature continued dropping after they got out of the water, was actually seen in 10 of the 11 subjects.
I think
So,
that's a good warning about anyone considering signing up for a UCSF study.
yeah, heads up, rectal thermometers for extended periods of time. But for those who do want to swim from Alcatraz to SF without significant risk of hypothermia, you should probably get a good wetsuit. I think that's step one. And then step two is, check out one of the events. Like, for example, this one I found online, the Alcatraz swim from the Odyssey Open Water Swimming Group. So you can check out their website. They've got events coming up in May of 2021. They had some events during COVID. They were apparently socially distanced and smaller than other events. But you can go to their website. You can learn all about it. The swim is approximately 2 miles from Alcatraz Island to the St. Francis Yacht Club on the northern coast of San Francisco. You can see the path in the picture on the left. They claim the swim can last between 30 minutes and an hour and a half, depending on your level of comfort, your ability, and the conditions of the water at the time. And also, they note that due to the added difficulty of swimming in open water in the bay compared to pool swimming, you should be able to swim at least 2 to 2.5 miles in a pool. During the swim, you'll be supported by the Odyssey Open Water Swimming Support Crew, who'll be nearby on kayaks, paddleboards, and motorboats. And so for $165, you get a boat ride to the rock to start the swim. You get the aforementioned support crew. You get a t-shirt. You get an Alcatraz swim sticker and a yellow silicone Alcatraz swim cap. So all yours for 165 bucks. Sign up. I'll see you on May 1st. No, I won't. I will not be there. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. That's going to be a no for me. That is going to be a hard no. All right, let's talk about the infamous escape from Alcatraz. This is a picture of John Anglin, Clarence, and Frank Morris. These are three inmates that were held in Alcatraz for a bank robbery in Gold Country, and then disappeared from the prison on June 11th, 1962. Now, most people think they perished, but there are many theories that they actually made it off the island. In 2016, Dutch scientists Olivier Hose, Rolf Hutt, and Peter Bart came to San Francisco to actually figure out what's happening. Using state-of-the-art hydraulic software, they actually recreated one of the most sophisticated tidal models of what the tides looked like that night. And this is what they actually developed. This is what the tidal patterns look like the night they actually disappeared. And you can actually see this in a paper, and PBS did a whole documentary on their research findings. Based on this diagram, they know that if the inmates are actually to have made it off the island, given the conditions and the stuff they had available to them, they would have had to have left the island between 11:30 and midnight. And here's sort of a closer look of what the simulation said was possible for them to actually escape from the island. And here's where it would have taken them. So the idea they would have gotten to Angel Island, which was sort of alluded to even in this film, is incredibly unlikely based on the tidal patterns, and most likely they're able to go towards the Golden Gate Bridge and would end up on the Marin side of the bridge. But of course, we don't have to rely just on theoretical models that recreate things from that night. We have real world testing because
Busters didn't, as usual.
By now.
The raft was never found, but according to FBI intelligence,
Can everyone hear?
It was made of 3 pontoons. It was 14 feet long and 6 wide.
Don't worry, we're not watching the whole episode,
Airtight,
just a
each
4-minute
seam
clip.
needs to be glued, dried, and compressed together. The real escapees did this in the dark and silently.
By the way, Adam mentioned when we were on Alcatraz that night that they ended up melting this raft that they made because they shot a rocket for another myth inside this room, and the heat from it actually ended up melting this
Based
boat
on the
that was
information that we have,
built out of rubber
I think
gum.
the raft is very similar to what they had on Alcatraz.
I give us a 60% chance of making it, 20% chance of immediate catastrophic failure, and 20% slow descent into the depths of hell.
The FBI files say the escapees were aiming for Angel Island, but the Mythbusters will test their own theory that they were smart enough to use the outgoing tide to carry them to the Marin headlands.
What's amazing is the Mythbusters were years ahead of that paper from the Dutch
attempt.
scientists.
So young Will Abbott has been drafted
Literally
from
6
the
years
workshop
ahead, I
to be
believe.
their partner in crime.
Got it? Got it. Go, Jamie. It's all you, buddy. Oh, Jamie. You're the man, baby.
The raft's passed its first test. It's holding Jamie's weight.
Here I go, Jamie.
Okay, we're off.
He's literally wearing Chuck Taylors in the boat, like mad respect.
Adam, Jamie, and Will are paddling across the tide. If they've miscalculated,
They're
the
paddles.
current will sweep them under the Golden Gate
Well,
Bridge
the inmates
and
supposedly
out
had
to sea.
oars. We found them on Angel Island.
The raft is getting weaker. Every 10 minutes, they have to add more air. And the tidal rip is getting rougher.
It's so cool.
It seemed impossible, but the Mythbusters are almost there. Paddling a raincoat raft more than 3 miles across a rushing tide, making landfall just east of the Golden Gate Bridge.
We made it! Given a reasonable amount of intelligence, I think it's entirely possible that they made it. Again, I think the most damning evidence that they didn't is the fact that no one's heard from them since.
unless they find any specific evidence that these guys, lived happily ever after or something after they got ashore, we won't know whether it was true or not. But we know that it could have been done, which is cool.
Here's something to ponder, though. The tide carried an ore to Angel Island. That tide came directly from the Marin Headlands. How did the ore get there, if not with the escapees? The mystery remains.
I'm king of the world!
Adam did say during that podcast that night that Jamie definitely did not help with the paddling. And he also did say that that it was a lot easier than the drama of TV would lead you on to be. He said it was actually not that bad. He said it was like in an hour they made it. And so it wasn't, outside of being like kind of a cold, windy night, it wasn't really that uncomfortable to make it all the way. So Jeff, what have we learned tonight?
I mean, I think we were both shocked to learn that when you have excess chemical weapons in a big ocean, problem solved.
All right. I think the other thing we learned for sure is Nick Cage says he likes history in this movie, and he learned about the alien landing at Roswell, and he found out how JFK was killed. I am saying it here. Stanley Goodspeed and Ben Gates might be the same person.
Nice. I think for long-standing fans of big screen science between The Simpsons and The Mythbusters, it's all been done. We just have to quote them and show clips from both of those shows, and our job is really easy.
Yeah, it is. We have to give this our highest San Francisco rating because this might be one of my favorite films set in San Francisco. And so we're going to give it the highest possible San Francisco rating, which is 4 exploding cable cars.
Of course.
Of course. Thank you everyone for sticking with us. This was a long movie and kind of like a really bizarre. We didn't mean it to be such a downer in terms of the science, but we were just sort of shocked about all the stuff around VX chemical gas. So we decided to go there and really talk about it. Thanks for joining us. I think, again, we want to say best to the Alamo Drafthouse. Thanks for everyone for chipping in to help support them. We're going to be back there as soon as we can. I believe that I will see a movie at the Alamo Drafthouse before the end of the year. I'm hoping before the end of the summer, if I'm lucky enough. I hope everyone out there stays safe. And thanks for joining us. We'll be back in 2 weeks with an episode of The Expanse, the first time we have ever done TV for Big Screen Science.
Yeah, check out, follow us on the Twitter, follow Kishore on the Twitch, and we will announce what episode or episodes. Yeah, always we'll take requests and various fun stuff online. So that'll be good stuff.
Yeah, and hit us up if you want to see us do anything else. Like, I had a lot of fun doing that stream during the Perseverance landing. So thanks for everyone that joined for that. I'm going to try to do that for some other big science events. They don't all have to be Mars rover landings, but I'm going to try to do that more often. But thanks everyone for joining us tonight, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
See y'all, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us.